The three men standing around the dog hadn't noticed the government plates on the truck he was tied to. That was their first mistake. Shelby Crowe had noticed the moment she pulled her green Ford F-250 into the lot of the Powder River Feed and Ranch Supply off Route 190, the gravel crunching flat and dry beneath her tires, in the way only October in Kaycee, Wyoming could produce. The sky above the Bighorn Mountains was the color of old pewter, and the wind moving down from the peaks smelled like pine resin and the first hard threat of snow. She had barely cut the engine when she saw them. Curtis Dobbs, his 26-year-old son Travis, and Floyd Meeks, the head ranch hand at the Dobbs cattle operation on the North Ridge, standing in a loose, laughing semicircle around a dog tied to the rear tow hitch of a matte black government-issue Chevy Silverado. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, not the kind of Malinois a person keeps in a suburban backyard to feel better about security. This one was 75 pounds of coiled muscle, wearing a dark, olive tactical harness with the Velcro patch on the chest stripped clean, leaving only the ghost outline of where an agency emblem had once been stitched. His coat was the deep amber and black of autumn leaves burning, and a narrow white scar crossed the bridge of his muzzle from left to right, like something written in a language only certain people were trained to read. He wasn't barking, he wasn't moving. He was sitting utterly still in the gravel, and his amber eyes were tracking Travis Dobbs' right hand, with the cold, mechanical patience of something that had been designed, not born. Shelby stepped out of her truck. She was 29 years old, and she had been working large animal veterinary calls across Johnson and Campbell counties for 3 years since leaving the Army. Before she left the Army, she had been a senior combat medic, attached to a forward surgical unit at Phoebe Gamberi in Kunar Province, which meant she had spent 4 years learning, among other things, exactly what military working dogs looked like when they were deciding whether or not a person was worth destroying. This dog was deciding. "You're going to want to back away from him," she called out across the gravel lot, her voice carrying the kind of flat, factual authority that doesn't raise itself to make a point. Curtis Dobbs turned. He was 58 years old with a neck like a fence post and a Carhartt jacket so stiff with grime it could have stood upright on its own. He ran Dobbs Consolidated Agriculture, 4,200 acres of grazing land, plus a feed distribution outfit that serviced most of the county, and he had never once in his adult life been told what to do by a woman who wasn't his mother. "Shelby Crowe," he said, correcting himself with a smirk. "Keep forgetting you took back your maiden name." "Step away from the dog, Curtis." Travis Dobbs laughed. He had his father's build and his father's opinion of himself, which made him the kind of 26-year-old that small towns either eventually humble or eventually produce a court date for. He was holding a length of orange baling twine, looping it through his fingers. "That dog's been sitting there for 40 minutes, Travis said. "Whoever tied him off went inside and forgot about him. Some government contractor passing through. We're doing the animal a favor." "You are not doing that animal a favor." "Look at him." Floyd Meeks waved a dismissive hand. Floyd was in his late 40s, broad-faced, with the permanently reddened cheeks of a man who worked outdoors and drank indoors. "He's just sitting there, docile as a lab puppy." Shelby had stopped walking about 12 feet from the semicircle. She kept her hands loose at her sides and her voice level, because she had learned from the men she'd worked alongside in Kunar Province that in a situation like this, shouting was the last tool you reached for. "Look at his left ear," she said, "inside the pinner. You'll see a 2-inch purple tattoo, a 7-digit number. That is not a pet. That is a federally registered military working dog on active assignment. The moment any of you puts a hand on that harness without his handler's authorization, you are committing a federal offense, and more immediately, you are going to get hurt." Curtis Dobbs spit a dark stream of tobacco juice into the gravel and looked at her the way he looked at county extension citations. "We're not afraid of some government mutt," he said. "Travis, put a lead on him." Travis stepped forward. "Travis, don't!" Her voice was sharp now, clipped, the voice she used when a horse was 2 seconds from kicking, and there was no more time for patience. "Don't touch the harness. Don't touch his collar. Don't put your hand anywhere near." Travis Dobbs reached down and closed his right hand around the top handle of the tactical harness. The Belgian Malinois did not growl, he did not bark. He simply moved, and in the half-second it took Travis's brain to register that the dog was no longer sitting in front of him. The animal had launched off his hind quarters, rotated his body in midair, and driven his jaws into Travis's right forearm with a force that made Floyd Meeks stumble backward 3 full steps. The nylon runner tied to the truck's hitch snapped drum-tight and held. The dog didn't need more reach than he had. He had calculated it already. Travis hit the gravel on his back with a sound like a sandbag dropped from a truck bed, and he screamed, not the yelp of surprise, but the long, sustained, high-pitched shriek of genuine agony, the kind that empties a person of everything they thought they knew about themselves. The dog held him pinned, 2 front paws square on his chest, jaws locked on the forearm in a controlled bite that wasn't shaking, wasn't tearing, just holding immovably, with the teeth seated precisely on the radius bone without puncturing the artery beneath it. "Get him off!" Travis screamed, his hat in the dirt, his whole body rigid with terror. "He's got the bone! Get him off me!" "Don't move," Shelby said, stepping forward with her palms out. "Travis, do not struggle. Stay still." Curtis Dobbs' face had gone from ruddy to a deep, suffused purple. He was not a man who responded to helplessness with stillness. His hand dropped to the hip holster he wore, legal in Wyoming, standard equipment on the Dobbs operation, and came up with a flat black Smith & Wesson .40 caliber semi-automatic. "I will put that dog in the ground," Curtis said, his voice shaking with something between rage and the particular terror of a powerful man confronting something he cannot buy or threaten into compliance. "Get off my son!" Floyd Meeks had pressed himself against the fender of the ranch truck, his face the color of old chalk. "Curtis," Shelby said steadily, positioning herself partially between the gun barrel and the dog. "If you fire that weapon, your son's arm is directly in the line. Look where the dog is positioned. Look at where Travis's arm is." Curtis's hand tightened on the grip. The barrel trembled. "Lower it," said a voice behind all of them. It wasn't a loud voice. It wasn't angry. It was the kind of quiet that has so much experience behind it that it no longer needs volume to fill a space. It came from the narrow alleyway between the feed supply building and the propane storage cage, and when the man it belonged to stepped out into the gray October light, Shelby recognized 2 things about him in the same instant. First, he moved like someone who had spent a long time operating in places where economy of motion was the difference between alive and not. Second, the scar along his left jaw was the exact same age and texture as the scar across the dog's muzzle. Grant Tillman was 38 years old. He wore a canvas field jacket over a dark Henley, worn Dana boots, and a grey ball cap pushed low over eyes the color of a sky 30 minutes before a storm. He wasn't imposing the way Curtis Dobbs was imposing. He was compact and quiet, and carried himself the way a load-bearing wall carries a house, without showing any of the effort. Clipped to his belt, partially visible beneath the jacket, was a brushed brass badge bearing the seal of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration. A coiled radio wire ran from a unit on his opposite hip up inside his collar to an earpiece seated in his left ear. He walked past Shelby with a single sideways glance that contained more information than most people convey in a full conversation: acknowledgement, situational awareness, and something that read clearly as appreciation for what she had already done, and stopped 6 feet from Curtis Dobbs and the gun. "Lower the weapon, Curtis," he said again. Same volume, same temperature. "Who the hell are you?" Curtis demanded. DEA Special Operations Division, Grant did not reach for identification. The badge was visible, the earpiece was visible, and more importantly, his posture was visible. The loose-armed stillness of someone who has already run the probabilities of this confrontation and is simply waiting for the other party to catch up. Set the weapon down right now, or the response team positioned in the tree line behind you is going to interpret that as a threatening gesture toward a federal officer. Curtis's head swiveled involuntarily toward the line of cottonwood trees bordering the lot's eastern edge. "Aus," Grant said quietly, one word German. The dog released Travis Dobbs' forearm, backed 2 precise steps, and dropped into a perfect heel position at Grant's left side. His amber eyes swept the lot in a calm, methodical arc. His breathing was completely even. He had not broken a sweat. Travis Dobbs lay in the gravel, clutching his arm and crying in a way that was entirely incompatible with every image he had ever cultivated of himself in this county. Blood was seeping through the heavy denim of his sleeve, bright and substantial. "Your son needs a pressure bandage," Grant said to Curtis, who still had the gun in his hand. "Set the weapon down. Look after your boy." Something in Curtis Dobbs cracked, not broke, just cracked, the way old concrete shows a fault line before it finally gives. His gun hand lowered 2 inches. His jaw worked. "You have no business here," he said, but the authority was gone from it now, like a fire that still looks large from a distance, but has already consumed everything that was feeding it. "My family built this county. This is a public commercial lot," Grant said, "and Vex doesn't alert without cause." He let the silence sit for a moment. "He alerted on your grain delivery truck," Grant continued, "the one in the loading bay on the south side of this building, the Dobbs Consolidated Agriculture Vehicle. Vex has been running interdiction detection for 9 years. He has never, not once, given a false field alert." A pause. "There are 44 kilograms of pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl sealed in vacuum bags inside the undercarriage of that truck, packed into the hollow axle housing. Your driver, a man named Dennis Garth, was detained at the Wyoming port of entry north of Buffalo 40 minutes ago by a secondary response team." The parking lot went very still. Curtis Dobbs stared at Grant Tillman. The gun hung at his side, now loose, as if his hand had simply forgotten it was there. Shelby exhaled carefully. She had worked enough emergency calls to know that the moment right after a crisis de-escalates is often the most dangerous one, because it's the moment when a cornered person realizes, for the first time, exactly how much they're about to lose. Floyd Meeks realized it first. He had been drifting steadily toward the side of the building during the exchange, and Shelby caught the movement in her peripheral vision. Floyd disappearing around the corner of the feed store toward the rear loading dock, his footsteps accelerating on the gravel. "Grant," she said sharply. "I see it. He was already keying his radio." 20 seconds later, they heard the scream. Not Floyd's voice, a girl's voice, high and terrified, cut off mid-breath into a sob. Maisie Strand was 17 years old and had been working the rear receiving dock at her family's feed store after school since she was 14. She was small and quick-witted and had, until this afternoon, considered the loading dock the most uneventful place in Kaycee, Wyoming. She had been rolling a hand truck loaded with mineral salt blocks when Floyd Meeks came around the corner with wild eyes and grabbed her by the arm. He had a livestock bolt gun from his jacket pocket, the type used for humane slaughter in ranch operations, and he pressed the flat contact muzzle against the side of Maisie's neck. "Keys!" Floyd screamed, his voice ragged and stripped of everything except naked fear. "Someone throw me the keys to a vehicle, any vehicle, right now. Or I swear to God." 2 DEA tactical officers materialized at the far end of the loading dock, weapons raised, issuing commands. Floyd pressed the bolt gun harder against Maisie's neck, and she cried out, going rigid with terror, her hand truck clattering to the concrete. "Back off!" Floyd screamed. "Back off, or I use this on her." Grant appeared at the near corner of the building. He did not draw his sidearm. He assessed the scene in approximately 1 second, the geometry, the angles, the blind spots, the margins, and looked down at Vex. Shelby moved left, deliberately, visibly, drawing Floyd's attention the way she had learned to draw panicked animals away from a corner, using presence and voice and movement rather than force. Because force in a confined space with a terrified subject almost always makes the situation smaller and more explosive. "Floyd," she said. Her voice was level and warm, the voice she used for horses that had gone past reason and needed to hear something human. "Look at me. You've known my family for 20 years. I know you didn't build this operation. You moved feed. You drove trucks. Whatever Curtis told you, whatever he paid you, you can still walk away from this as a witness instead of a principal. But only if Maisie walks away from it right now." Floyd's eyes cut to her. His jaw was working. The bolt gun trembled against Maisie's neck. "They'll cage me either way," he said. "Not for as long as they'll cage Curtis." His gaze flicked from Shelby to the tactical officers to the corner of the building, calculating exits that didn't exist, running out of road in every direction. "Maisie has nothing to do with any of this," Shelby said, softer now, almost quiet. "Put it down, Floyd." He turned his head toward her voice. "Fass," Grant Tillman said, barely above a whisper. Vex was already moving. He had been repositioning for 2 full seconds before Floyd heard the command, staying low against the concrete wall, using the parked pallet jack as a blind, moving through the exact gap that Floyd's focus on Shelby had opened. When Vex launched from the edge of the pallet jack, he was already airborne. Floyd's peripheral vision caught nothing but a blur of amber before the dog's jaws closed on his right knee from the lateral side with torque and precision that immediately buckled the joint outward. Floyd's shriek was cut off by the impact of his own body hitting the dock floor. The bolt gun skidded across the concrete, well clear of both him and Maisie, and Shelby was already moving, crossing the distance to Maisie in 4 long strides, pulling the girl away from Floyd and into the shelter of her own body, turning her face away from the scene. "Don't look," Shelby said. "Just breathe. You're out. You're out." Maisie was shaking so hard her teeth were clicking together. She pressed her face into Shelby's jacket and held on. 3 DEA tactical officers were on Floyd in under 5 seconds, cuffing his wrists behind him while he lay making sounds that no longer resembled anything intentional. Vex stepped back on a silent hand signal, returned to heel position beside Grant and sat. His breathing was still even. When the federal convoy arrived, 4 unmarked black Suburbans and 2 Johnson County Sheriff's units, blue lights cutting through the slate-gray afternoon, the parking lot of the Powder River Feed and Ranch Supply looked like something Kaycee, Wyoming, had never had a category for. Curtis Dobbs stood with his wrists zip-tied, staring at the gravel with the hollow, collapsed expression of a man watching 40 years of power dissolve at once. Travis was loaded into an EMT vehicle, his forearm heavily wrapped, his eyes closed, the arrogance entirely evacuated. What remained was just a young man in pain who had made a very wrong calculation about a dog. DEA Special Agent in Charge Renee Fowler stepped from the lead Suburban and moved directly to Grant. She was a tall woman in her late 40s with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had stopped needing to prove herself approximately 15 years ago. "Your dog's alert held," she said, pulling back her jacket in the reflexive habit of a 20-year field agent. Secondary team confirmed the axle housing, 44 kilograms. They also found an additional 32 in a false floor compartment in the grain trailer intercepted at the port of entry. "That's 1 delivery," Grant said. "How many routes?" Based on the ledgers recovered from the truck cab, at least 3 routes per week for the past 14 months. Feed deliveries to ranch supply stores across Johnson, Campbell, and Sheridan counties. Agent Fowler's voice was quiet and measured. "The distribution network is substantial. We're linking it to the overdose numbers this region has reported for the past year. The Dobbs operation was using the legitimate feed business as full cover. Invoices, weights, delivery logs. It was clean on paper. Sheriff Dean Blaine of Johnson County walked out of the feed store's side entrance. He had been sheriff for 11 years, which meant he had watched the Dobbs family operate in this county for 11 years with the particular frustration of a lawman who knows something is wrong and cannot yet prove the shape of it. He stopped in front of Curtis Dobbs and stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. "You told me 4 years ago," Sheriff Blaine finally said, "that your family was the backbone of this county, that you kept ranchers in business and people fed." He picked up Curtis's hat from the hood of the truck and set it on the roof of a cruiser. "The federal grand jury will figure out what else you were moving through those routes." He walked away without waiting for a response. Shelby found Grant near the government Silverado after the last set of cuffs went on. Vex was at heel, and Shelby crouched slowly in front of him, keeping her posture low and open, extending the back of her hand the way she always approached working animals. No pressure, no demand, just the offer of contact. Vex glanced up at Grant. Grant gave a small, barely perceptible nod. The dog extended his muzzle and pressed it into Shelby's palm. She felt the warmth of his breath and the particular density of him, the way he was both entirely at rest and entirely present at the same time, the way animals are when they have finally decided that the moment they're in is safe. "His right shoulder," she said, her trained eye catching the subtle weight shift. "He's loading asymmetrically. Old injury." "ID'd strike in the Corangal Valley," Grant said. His voice had dropped to something quieter than it had been all afternoon. Fragment lodged near the scapular joint. "The surgeons recovered most of it. He compensates well." "He compensates well enough that most people wouldn't notice," Shelby said. "But it's there. He needs imaging and probably some targeted soft tissue work. I can run the x-rays today if you want. My clinic is 8 miles east." Grant looked at her a pause. "He doesn't let most people touch him," he said. "He let me touch him just now." Grant had no answer for that. Shelby scratched gently behind Vex's scarred ear, and the dog exhaled, slow and long, and rested the weight of his chin across her knee. Not a performance, not a trained response. Just the weight of an animal deciding on its own terms and no one else's that a person was worth trusting. "What comes next for him?" she asked. Grant turned the radio unit over in his hand. Outside, the last federal transport vehicle was reversing out of the lot, its tires popping over the gravel. "His retirement papers cleared this morning," he said. Today was his final operational deployment, 9 years of active interdiction. He flagged a fentanyl shipment in a frozen seafood container at the port of Tacoma last January that the primary scanner missed entirely. Found a cache of stolen military ordnance in a Cheyenne storage unit 6 months before that. He has earned whatever comes next. Where does he go? Wherever I go. I moved to DEA contractor work 4 years ago when I transitioned out of Delta Force. We've been operational partners the whole time. I wasn't going to let him retire to someone else. Shelby stood, brushing gravel dust from her jeans. "Where are you based right now?" Grant looked out past the cottonwood tree line toward the ridgeline of the Bighorns rising gray and enormous in the north. "Nowhere permanent," he said. "I have 40 acres east of Kaycee," Shelby said. "Land that needs a dog who understands how to move through it. I run a small rescue operation on the side. Horses, working animals, the occasional retired service dog. I've never had a K9 of this caliber come through." She looked at him steadily. "The veterinary work is free for him." Grant was quiet in the way of someone genuinely considering something, not performing consideration, just actually doing it. "He'd need room to run," he said finally. 40 acres, she said again. Vex had moved, in the silence between them, to stand between them both, and he had leaned his weight, lightly but unmistakably, against the outside of Shelby's left boot. It was not a subtle gesture. Grant watched it happen, and something in his expression shifted in a way that wasn't large but was real. The look of a person who has been carrying something a very long time and has just been shown, unexpectedly, a place where it might be set down. Agent Fowler passed by with a folder under her arm, slowing just enough to take in the three of them. Her expression held the quietly satisfied quality of someone who has spent a long career watching things go wrong and knows, when they see it, the moment something goes right instead. "Vex did good work today," she said to Grant, then looked at Shelby. "You kept Floyd talking long enough to open the approach angle. Maisie Strand goes home tonight because you made that call." She didn't wait for a response. She was already moving, already on her radio, already dealing with the next thing. The last cruiser pulled out of the lot. The sun broke briefly through the cloud cover and threw long afternoon light across the Bighorn ridgeline, turning the cottonwood, leaves the color of hammered copper. The gravel lot of the Powder River feed and ranch supply was empty now, except for a government truck, a green F-250, and 3 figures standing in the quiet. Shelby knelt beside Vex one more time and ran her hands along his right shoulder, carefully, professionally, reading the landscape of old damage through the palms of her hands. "He's been compensating for years," she said. "There's chronic inflammation in the joint capsule, anti-inflammatories, targeted massage, specific rehab exercises. It won't undo the shrapnel, but it would make every morning easier than the one before it." She looked up. "He's not in distress. He's just been working too hard on a frame that never fully healed." "He never once showed it," Grant said. "They never do," Shelby said. "That's the thing about working dogs. They show up. Every single time, regardless of what it costs them. They don't know how to do anything else." She said it quietly, the way you say something that's simply true. Grant was still for a long moment, not unaffected, just quiet about it. Vex turned his head and pressed the top of his scarred muzzle once, briefly, against the back of Shelby's hand. The small, deliberate gesture of an animal that has made up its own mind. Grant Tillman looked at the dog, then at Shelby Crowe, then at the mountains beyond the tree line, gold and gray and immovable in the October light. "Show me the 40 acres, he said. Vex's tail swept twice across the gravel, slow and certain, like the final mark at the end of a very long sentence, and what followed was not an ending, but the particular quality of quiet that belongs only to things that have finally found where they were always meant to be.